Hello, everyone. Welcome to this year's virtual forum. We're thrilled to have everyone here. Well, let me make sure this works. Here we go. I'm Nico Larco. I'm the director of the Urbanism Next Center here at the University of Oregon. I'm also a professor of architecture and urban design here, and we are absolutely thrilled to have everybody joining us. We have a fantastic day plan that we've been working on for over a year and then completely restructured in the last 2 months, and have just a fantastic lineup. We've been meeting with everyone who's going to be speaking with you, and just really excited about the conversations we're going to have. Great to have a mix of people here, and really excited to see how the day goes. This is our third year of Urbanism Next. 2018, we kicked this off, and that seems like ancient history now. So much has changed, was already changing before we reached this point. And these last few months have also obviously brought a whole lot of changes that we're really looking forward to discussing with you today. Urbanism Next has historically really looked at a couple different things. We're trying to understand what disruptions are happening, what the major disruptions are to the way cities are working right now. We try to understand what the cascading impacts of those things are. So how is it that these disruptions are going to change this whole range of different issues around the city: land use, urban design, building design, transportation, real estate, these types of things. And most importantly, what we're really interested in is how do we shape those outcomes? How do we make sure that the things that are happening, the changes that we're seeing, how do we make sure that we point those towards community goals, that we make sure that we don't get negative effects of these things? Historically, we've looked at these topics, as many of you know who have joined us before. We look at things like new mobility, autonomous vehicles, and e-commerce, and have been looking at those. And it turns out that there's this new disruption that exists now, which is COVID-19, and is changing all of our lives. So we found it very helpful, actually, the way that we've been working as a way of being, really approaching how these disruptions are happening. So many of you are familiar with this thing called the Urbanism Next framework that we developed over the last few years. This is its last iteration that was developed just a couple of months ago. But we look at these forces of change, as I mentioned before: new mobility, AVs, e-commerce, urban delivery, and now COVID-19. And we really try to understand across all these different disciplines, dimensions, what the impacts of these things are and how they're related to each other: land use, urban design, building design, transportation, real estate. Always keep in mind, what are the implications of these things? How is it going to affect things like equity, health and safety, the environment, the economy? And as I mentioned before, importantly, what do we do about it? How do we shape these things? Well, it turns out this has been a really helpful framework for us as we think of thought of technological changes happening in cities. And it's actually also a really helpful framework in the methods that we've been using to kind of tackle what's happening with COVID. Now, the way that we're thinking about this, and you're going to hear us talk a lot about this today, is that we're kind of thinking of COVID as these three phases. There's the lockdown phase, which we're pretty much in right now, and we're seeing tons of impacts, real-world impacts. You're going to hear about some of those today. Impacts on transit, on micromobility, on e-commerce, really shifting the way that we live, as we're all kind of confined mostly to our homes. We're going to be getting into a reopening that really where we start to understand what the changes are going to be as we are allowed to move around somewhat, and this could be cycling, as we all know. And then what we're really interested in is this recovery new normal. What is the future is going to look like? So while we are here right now, somewhere within this, probably different of us, because we have a global audience here today in different stages of that, what we're really going to be focusing on today is the reopening and the recovery and the new normal. How do we understand these things? How do we prepare for them? And what might we be seeing coming down the pipe? A lot of questions I'm sure you all have. You know, will we ever share again? Will we bike share, scooter share, car share, ride share? Are those things going to happen? Is this the end of cities? Lots of questions about this. Are we going to completely shirk density and just decide that living near people is not a good thing? I'll tell you, I don't think that's going to happen. And will we all work from home forever? I think we all know it's been kind of surprising how productive those of us who can work from home have been able to be during this experience. How will that affect things as we go on? Now, the future is unknown, I think we all know that bit. But we can think about some of the variables that are going to be impacted. We might not know the future, but we can know what will shape it. And at Urbanism Next, and you're going to be hearing a lot about this today, we've really thought about these three major variables that we think we need to be paying attention to. The length of the reopening, the fear of future pandemics, will that continue? Is this just a one-time thing? And the magnitude of economic impacts. If we think about the length of reopening, and you consider these three stages, the one that we're moving into right now is reopening, it is a big difference of what exactly, how long this will last. I firmly believe that if we were to just reopen right now, if it's completely able, this thing magically went away and we were able to reopen right now, we might really revert back to some of our old patterns, largely because this is so different what we're living right now than what our regular life was, that we might just completely jump into that. But if the reopening is lengthy and we start to be able to move around, to see people, to start having more of the life that looked like what we had before, but with all these constraints and all this pressure of what's happening with COVID, might have a much greater impact. I think that'll actually impact us more than the lockdown phases. A big question, though, is how long is that going to last? When we first went into this, people said 3 to 8 weeks, then 3 months. And now this is a study that just came out a couple of weeks ago, published in Science, where they're really thinking, well beyond just a few months. I mean, we could be 12 months, 18 months in this. And the question will be, do we stay immune once people have this? At what level do we have herd immunity? Will there be a vaccine? Will this be more like the flu, or we have recurrence of these things? And that's going to have a significant impact of us as we're in this in-between phase, because it's really going to start shaping our habits, what we're used to. And as we know, what we get used to in our lives affects a whole lot of the decisions we make, much more than any rational thought. Right? So as we have things such as people driving much more, for instance, because they're concerned about their health impacts. Potentially a huge boom in microtransit. We're seeing that happening in China as it opens up. Huge shift to opening new, defining streets primarily for micromobility, and large impacts on transit. So one of the questions that we really need to ask ourselves is, what makes these habits sticky? How do we help push towards ones that help community goals, such as increasing cycling? And how do we make sure that we reduce ones that are not helping us with community goals, such as reduction of use of transit or increased amounts of car use? And this is a political and psychological question as much as a logistic organizational question, but it's something that we need to organize. Same kind of questions with e-commerce, huge jump. You'll hear much more about that today. Huge rises in the amount of people that are using e-commerce. How much of that is going to stick? How much of it have we overcome thresholds or barriers that we had before this? And then obviously the whole question about working from home. 44% of the workforce, I've seen estimates of above 60% of the workforce doing some kind of work from home right now. As I mentioned, we've been surprised at how productive that is, and will that stay with us? The second real question is, will we have a fear of future pandemics? Is this a blip? Is it a once in a lifetime event that's going to be this moment that we look back to and think, remember 2020, maybe even 2021, that was a strange time, right? But we won't go back to something that where we're not worried about these things. There's been lots of discussions of this question of like a 1.5 meter society, or will social distancing be the normal, right? Or almost like reopening be the new normal. And I would say, let's not panic yet. We don't know. We're probably going to know a lot more about this in the fall, but some of the impacts that we're talking about, and we see a lot of conversations about within cities about, complete transformations and almost the decimation of cities, the complete, no one will ever use transit again. I think we're not there. We're not there. So I don't think this is something we need to worry about quite yet. There's lots of things that happen, and in the fall, that will be much clearer to us. The last key variable that we really need to pay attention to is the magnitude of economic impacts. We're seeing a lot of these, as you all know, in real time. The news is hard to swallow on some days. And we're already seeing a whole lot of impacts of this in new mobility. You're going to be hearing more about this today as well. So limits on demand, as people are not moving around. Limits on supply, a huge question about this issue of how it is that we are providing transportation, especially with new mobility companies. But one of the things that we really need to pay attention to is how this is going to change the whole business landscape. There's a lot of consolidation that we see on the horizon, and you're already seeing some of that happen. Grubhub going to Uber, Jump going to Lime, which might now go again to Uber, as they've got an option to purchase Lime in the future. Think about what's going to happen in this new reality where larger companies that have access to cash are able to survive through this, are able to invest and buy a lot of the smaller companies, able to buy a lot of the competition. And when we all reemerge into this new normal, there'll be a much changed landscape. Probably a lot less of these smaller startups, a lot more of the larger companies who've been able to weather the storm. A real shift in what's possible, the scale of change we might see. And also, we think about the relationship between the public and private sector. What is it like when there might be less competition? These are serious questions for us to consider in the topics that we look at. And as always with Urbanism Next, one thing that we're absolutely focused on is what are the cascading impacts across all these different dimensions of these disruptions, right? So for instance, some of the cascading impacts we're looking at, large questions on will we continue to work from home? Absolutely seems like that is a possibility. And there's all these repercussions that come off of that. And part of the role of Urbanism Next, part of the reason that we're thrilled to work with all the partners we work with and work across so many disciplines, is trying to understand the relationships and the cascading impacts of these things. So if we end up working more from home, there's absolutely going to be a reduction in the amount of travel that we're seeing, definitely work-related travel, which is going to lead to a reduced peak travel demand, right? Large changes to our transportation system. At the same time, from the real estate world, we're going to see a lot of reduced demand in office space and a reduced value and price of office real estate. Think about how that is going to impact central cities, particularly. Some of the suburban areas, we're already seeing this change happening in the tech sector with a lot of companies pulling back leases and definitely future leases and not taking on options for land that they were going to be purchasing to expand their campuses. And this will also have an impact on the retail and restaurant side of real estate. So the central cities that have all these services that help feed the office environment will no longer be in demand. At the same time, if we're all working from home, there's this other shift that happens, which is, well, many of us would still like to have a cup of coffee or be able to go run an errand. And it might actually increase the demand for neighborhood commercial, walkable neighborhood commercial. Living near Main Street, a town center might actually be even more important than it is today, as we don't do a lot of these things in central cities. And of course, with all the work that we do at Urbanism Next, the backdrop is, what is the impact going to be on equity, health, and the environment? How are these changes across all these different dimensions going to impact these things that we care about most in our societies? So the forum we have scheduled for you today is trying to take apart a lot of these things. We've been thrilled in organizing this. I think I mentioned we've met at least twice with each person presenting to help create a really fantastic program for everyone. We're going to be talking this morning with Ron Milam, Eric Wolmendorf, and Laura Schul about what's happening right now with transportation, looking at some of the data that's coming in and what that might point at towards the future. Salita Reynolds from LADOT is going to be talking about how they're shifting their entire strategic plan based on what's happening with COVID. We're going to have short breaks in between here. Coming back, Laura Bliss from Bloomberg and City Labs is going to be with Shinpei from Uber and Alka Pazichanix, talking from Seattle Department of Transportation to talk about what does resilience mean? How do these companies continue to work? How do we continue to provide services? And how does a public and private partnership work in all of this? We're going to have a fantastic session with Garrick Brown from Cushman Wakefield, Sucharita Kodali from Forrester, looking at the restaurant and retail business. Lots of data coming in right now, thinking about where that's going to point to, and looking at e-commerce and thinking about how much of the trends that we're seeing there are going to be sticking. In the afternoon, we've got Karen Manklusen from Polis coming to talk to us about what's happening in Europe and how the shifting role of government in different areas across Europe. Tamika Butler from California Tool Design is going to be talking about equity issues, and do we really want to go back to what was normal? How do we maybe use this opportunity to help shape a future that is more equitable? Harriet Droning from Numo is going to be talking about how we work on change and drawing from examples of major changes that we've had to deal with in the past. This is not new. How does, as an organization, do you do that? We're going to have, very excited to have Jeff Tumlin from SFMTA coming to give some closing remarks and some thoughts for how we move in the future. And then I'll be doing some closing remarks at the end. And we're really excited about this whole day. I want to give a tremendous thanks to our entire Urbanism Next staff, which you see many of them here, especially to Amanda Davidowitz, Becky Steckler, and Marsha Gravison, who've made all of this really come together for the conference. Tremendous amount of retooling that we've had to do and working quickly, and we really appreciate it. We have a fantastic group of faculty that work with us from a range of different departments. Is really what makes us strong at Urbanism Next and really creates fantastic conversations and ideas, as well as students from a number of different departments who've been working with us this last year to help develop a lot of the work that have structured what we're talking about now. If you don't know about it, I want to tell you about the Nexus, which is a site that we launched in January. This is really puts in one place a lot of the information that we've been gathering, a lot of things we've been thinking about for the last 3 years. Fantastic, really excited to have been partners with Numo on making this happen. The Nexus is a one-stop location where you can find information on the technologies, on potential impacts, broad implications of those impacts, how it's going to affect equity, health, the environment, and the economy, what you should be doing about it on the side of governance and design, and then a whole bunch of resources for you. So this is a great place to think, to see latest thinking on these topics, and also has resources to help introduce people to these issues who might not know as much about it. So definitely think about your city managers, your mayors, electeds who maybe aren't as immersed in these topics. A range of different reports there that you can find on that. And then we've just recently added in the last few weeks, and a big thanks to the whole team that Amanda Howell is leading there, on what's happening with COVID. And a lot of the topics that we're going to be talking about today actually came out of the work that's happening with this group. And we've been looking at a bunch of different sectors within kind of the Urbanism Next topics and thinking about what the impacts have been with COVID and what they're going to be, again, thinking about the medium to long-term impacts of these things. I want to thank our steering committee members. We have a great group who's helped us put together a fantastic in-person conference that then we had to quickly shift to be a fantastic online conference. So I really appreciate all the work and thinking that has helped shape that from the local and national chapters of the APA, from ASLA, ULI, local and national chapters of that, AIA, and Numo and Portland State University. Thanks so much for all the help. Really, really appreciate it. I want to let you know that you can be networking on Slack with all this. So we've set up a Slack channel. There's information on that in the chat box, and here you have that information here. Great opportunity to network and connect with people, discuss the presentations. There's a different Slack channel for each presentation, and you can continue those conversations after the event itself. Social media, as we love to do, UNext 2020, please share your thoughts about what's happening here, the interesting things that you hear. We'd love to hear how you're thinking about all this. And finally, a tremendous thank you to our partners and sponsors. This could not have happened at all without you, especially the second iteration. So thankful to have you as partners in all of this, and for all of you who stuck with us as this shift happened from the online to, or from the in-person to online. So thank you to Numo, APA local national chapters, ASLA Oregon, the Regional Urban Design Committee of the AIA and AIA Oregon, ULI, and the ULI Northwest, and all of our sponsors, Numo, Uber, Knight Foundation, Tool, Perkins & Will, Lyft, Eco Northwest, Oregon Department of Transportation, Kittleson, Inker Moyson, Methuen, Alta, Fair and Pierce, Parametrics, and Arup. Really just a tremendous thanks for your support in this. This meant a lot to us and has made this possible. And I want to close with saying that what we really need to think about in all this, which is hard sometimes, I'm an optimist by nature, but sometimes it's very hard to stay optimistic. But we have to remember that our reality is in large part what we make of it, right? We are given some parameters, some limits by things outside, but how we react makes a huge difference. And I really think that part of the message that we want to give today is that we can be informed, we can think through these things, and we can choose optimism and then work to make a world that fulfills that vision. And I really hope that the information that we're going to be sharing today, all the thoughts that people have been putting together, help you do that, that you take that not as a reason to cower, but as a rallying cry of, okay, these are the things that we can think about. This is how we can get our arms around these topics, and this is how we can all together help shape a better future.